The day the Kelleran fleet arrived was unlike any other in human history. It began like a normal morning, the sun casting its golden rays across the blue sky, and people going about their usual routines, blissfully unaware of the impending doom. But by noon, the sky darkened, not from clouds, but from the colossal shadows cast by alien warships that blocked out the sun. Massive angular vessels, each the size of a small city, descended through the atmosphere with terrifying precision. They hovered over Earth's major cities, their sleek metallic surfaces glistening ominously. These ships bore markings and symbols from an ancient language, one that hadn't been spoken for millennia by any race that still walked the galaxy. The Kelleran had finally arrived. In New York, London, Beijing, Tokyo, every major hub of human civilization, people looked up in horror as the ships spread out across the sky like a blanket of destruction. Panic erupted as news broadcasts flashed images of the same scene playing out across continents. World governments scrambled to respond, desperately trying to contact the invaders, but there was no reply, only silence. When the Kelleran finally spoke, it wasn't to parley, but to declare dominance. A deep, resonating voice, amplified and broadcasted through their ships, echoed across the world. It spoke in perfect English, carrying an air of disdain and supremacy. "Humans of Earth," the voice boomed, reverberating through the air. "We are the Kelleran, masters of 1,000 worlds. Your planet is now under our control. Surrender, and you may yet be spared." The message was simple, almost routine, as if this scenario had played out 1,000 times before across the galaxy. But the Kelleran had made a grave mistake. They had assumed that humans would respond like all the other species they had conquered. To understand the Kelleran, one must understand their history. They were ancient, far older than any species humanity had encountered. Their empire spanned countless star systems, built on the ashes of civilizations that had once thought themselves strong. The Kelleran did not see themselves as destroyers, but as the rightful rulers of the galaxy. For millennia, they had crushed opposition, using their overwhelming technology and war strategies honed through centuries of conquest. Their war doctrine was one of precise, calculated dominance: conquer the planet, subjugate its people, and strip its resources to fuel their endless expansion. And so, when they looked upon Earth, they saw it as just another primitive world, filled with a weak and divided species. They saw a race still learning to travel among the stars, a race armed with simple ballistic weaponry and fragile metal ships. They saw prey. The Kelleran were not prepared for what happened next. Within hours of their arrival, the Kelleran made their move. From the bowels of their ships, legions of metallic insect-like drones descended. Each drone was designed for shock and awe, armed with plasma weapons and impenetrable shields. They spread out over cities, obliterating any resistance with terrifying efficiency. Earth's military forces, tanks, jets, and even experimental energy weapons, were useless. Plasma bolts melted through steel and concrete as if they were paper, leaving entire battalions as little more than smoldering craters. Entire skyscrapers were toppled, bridges were shattered, and any resistance was met with overwhelming firepower. In Washington, D.C., the president watched grimly as reports streamed in from across the nation. General Carter, a seasoned military strategist, slammed his fist onto the table. "They're wiping us out," he growled, his face red with fury. "We need to launch a full-scale attack." "With what?" asked Dr. Hahn, a leading scientist in experimental weaponry. "Our technology is outmatched. Our weapons can't even scratch their armor." "Then we use nuclear weapons," the general snapped. The room fell silent. The thought of unleashing nuclear firepower on their own cities was unthinkable. But it seemed they had no other choice. "We'll lose millions," whispered Secretary Alvarez, her voice trembling. "We'd be condemning our own people to death." Before the president could make a decision, another broadcast interrupted them. The Kelleran leader, a figure shrouded in shadows, appeared on every screen in the world. His form was tall and imposing, with sharp, angular features that seemed to reflect the coldness of the void itself. He raised a single clawed hand. "Humans of Earth, we tire of your pathetic resistance. You have 1 hour to surrender, or we will raze your cities to the ground." The ultimatum hung in the air like a death sentence. 1 hour to surrender or face total annihilation. For many, the initial shock gave way to despair. Civilians huddled in makeshift shelters. Families clung to each other, praying for a miracle. But for some, despair gave way to something else. Something darker. Something more dangerous. Rage. In the underground bunkers of Paris, resistance leaders gathered. In the ruins of Tokyo, survivors rallied around a young boy who had just hacked into the Kelleran's communications network. In rural Kansas, an ex-military engineer began tinkering with an alien drone, intent on turning it into a weapon. From the ashes of defeat, humanity's true strength began to stir. In a small town outside of Dallas, Texas, a group of teenagers watched in horror as a Kelleran drone squadron tore through their neighborhood. Rather than flee, they grabbed whatever weapons they could: hunting rifles, old army gear, and even homemade explosives. Their leader, a scrappy young man named Jake, grinned fiercely as they took up positions on the rooftop of an old grocery store. "If they think we're gonna roll over, they've got another thing coming," he growled. The drones approached, their sleek forms gliding through the smoke-filled air. Jake took a deep breath and aimed his rifle at the lead drone's eye, pulling the trigger. The bullet ricocheted harmlessly off the drone's armor. Jake's heart sank. Then, with a flash of green light, the drone exploded. Jake blinked, stunned, as his friend Maria lowered a small handheld device. "EMP pulse," she said, smirking. "Turns out these aliens aren't as invincible as they think." The teens cheered, and a new, dangerous thought took root in their minds. Maybe, just maybe, they could fight back. As the hour of ultimatum ticked down, small pockets of resistance flared across the globe. The Kelleran were caught off guard. They had expected total compliance, submission through fear. But instead, they found defiance. From guerrilla warfare to cyber attacks, humanity struck back with an ingenuity and adaptability that the Kelleran had never encountered before. Each time the Kelleran adapted to a new tactic, humanity countered with something even more unpredictable. They were used to facing opponents who broke at the sight of their warships, who bent under their might. But humans, they seemed to grow stronger with every defeat. As the world watched, holding its breath, a single thought began to spread across humanity. We might actually have a chance. The Kelleran had arrived as conquerors, believing Earth would fall in days. But Earth was about to show them that they had gravely underestimated the indomitable will of humanity. The first week of the Kelleran invasion had been a bloodbath. Earth's cities were scarred, its armies shattered, and millions of civilians were displaced. The human race, faced with overwhelming firepower and seemingly invincible technology, was on the verge of collapse. Yet, despite the chaos, something unexpected began to happen. The Kelleran started to encounter resistance. Not the desperate, hopeless kind they had seen on other worlds, but something far more dangerous. Organized guerrilla warfare. Small, unpredictable human cells began popping up in urban ruins and rural countrysides, using hit-and-run tactics to pick apart the seemingly indestructible Kelleran forces. In the ruins of Berlin, one of the first major resistance operations was unfolding. Led by Major Susan Aldridge, a former intelligence officer, a ragtag group of soldiers and civilian volunteers had managed to turn the city's shattered infrastructure into a labyrinth of traps and ambush points. Major Aldridge crouched in the shadows of a half-collapsed office building, peering through a pair of cracked binoculars. Just a few blocks away, a Kelleran patrol moved methodically through the rubble, their massive armored forms glinting in the fading daylight. "Hold positions," she whispered into her comlink, her voice barely audible. The resistance fighters remained hidden, weapons at the ready. A mix of regular soldiers and civilians. They had nothing but outdated firearms, homemade explosives, and scavenged alien tech. But they had something the Kelleran didn't: knowledge of the terrain. "Wait for it," Aldridge murmured as the patrol came closer. The Kelleran moved with mechanical precision, their scanners sweeping back and forth. These weren't drones, but full-blooded Kelleran warriors, each one towering over the humans by several feet. Their armor was thick, their weapons devastating. But the resistance fighters knew something else. The Kelleran were predictable. As the lead warrior stepped into the center of a broken street, Aldridge tapped a small button on her wrist device. The ground erupted in a flash of fire and shrapnel. The explosion sent the Kelleran squad flying, their heavy bodies crashing to the ground. Before they could react, the resistance fighters opened fire from all sides. Gunshots rang out, mixed with the high-pitched whine of energy pulses from salvaged alien rifles. The Kelleran struggled to regroup, but the humans didn't give them a chance. They struck from the shadows, hit and retreated, then struck again. Within minutes, the mighty Kelleran squad was reduced to smoldering heaps of broken metal and bleeding flesh. "Pull back," Aldridge ordered, her eyes darting to the skies. "Reinforcements will be here any second." As the resistance fighters melted into the ruins, leaving behind only the charred remains of the Kelleran squad, Aldridge allowed herself a small, grim smile. The Kelleran weren't invincible after all. Back on the Kelleran flagship, the High Commander, Alarak, watched the latest battlefield reports with a deep frown. He towered over his subordinates, his crimson eyes narrowed in irritation. "This is unacceptable," he growled, his voice like the grinding of metal. "Explain to me how a primitive species is managing to outmaneuver our forces." His officers shifted nervously. One of them, a junior tactician, stepped forward. "High Commander, it appears the humans are employing a variety of new strategies. They've been adapting rapidly to each of our attacks, using their environment to their advantage." "Adapting?" Alarak sneered. "They're nothing but savages, a species barely capable of interstellar travel. How could they be outwitting us?" The tactician swallowed hard. "Sir, it's not just their tactics. They're learning. Every time we counter their strategy, they come up with something new. It's as if they're evolving right before our eyes." Alarak's scowl deepened. Evolution on such a short time scale? Impossible. And yet, the evidence was undeniable. The humans were proving to be a far greater challenge than the Kelleran had anticipated. "Deploy more troops to the hotspots," he ordered sharply. "And double our patrols. I want these pests exterminated." As the Kelleran tightened their grip, humanity fought back with every trick they could muster. In the mountains of Afghanistan, a group of elite commandos used the terrain to ambush and destroy an entire Kelleran supply convoy. In the streets of Rio de Janeiro, gangs and former soldiers worked together to harry Kelleran troops, setting traps and disappearing into the maze of favelas. But it wasn't just soldiers who were fighting back. In a small laboratory hidden deep within the forests of Finland, Dr. Elena Petrova and her team were hard at work on a radical new form of warfare. Using samples of Kelleran technology scavenged from battle sites, they had discovered something shocking. The Kelleran bioarmor, which they had thought was simply advanced metallurgy, was actually organic in nature, alive, in a sense. "We can exploit this," Dr. Petrova said excitedly, holding up a vial of a glowing green liquid. "If we can introduce a virus that targets their armor's cellular structure, we can weaken it, make it brittle, vulnerable." Her assistant, a young biochemist named Marco, looked skeptical. "A virus that can break down alien bioarmor? That sounds like science fiction." Dr. Petrova grinned fiercely. "So is everything else about this invasion. If we're going to survive, we need to start thinking outside the box." Word of Dr. Petrova's research spread quickly through the resistance network. Within days, vials of the experimental virus, dubbed Agent Strain, were being smuggled to resistance cells around the world. It wasn't without its risks. Agent Strain was unstable, still in the testing phase, but humanity didn't have time for caution. In the shattered remains of Los Angeles, a resistance cell prepared to test the new weapon. A squad of Kelleran warriors marched through the ruins, their massive forms casting long shadows in the evening light. They moved with confidence, secure in their invulnerability. From a nearby rooftop, resistance leader Tom Harris watched through the scope of his rifle. Next to him, a young woman held a small handheld launcher containing a vial of Agent Strain. "Are you sure about this?" she whispered nervously. Tom took a deep breath, his eyes never leaving the Kelleran below. "No," he admitted, "but we don't have a choice." He nodded, and the woman fired. The vial arced through the air and shattered against the lead Kelleran's chest plate. For a moment nothing happened. Then, Slowly, the creature's armor began to darken, its surface bubbling and warping. "What?" the Kelleran warrior began, but its voice turned into a scream as the armor cracked, then shattered, leaving its body exposed. "Now!" Tom shouted. The resistance fighters opened fire, bullets and energy blasts tearing into the Kelleran's unprotected flesh. Within seconds, the mighty warrior was dead, its body crumpling to the ground. The other Kelleran roared in fury, but panic flickered in their eyes. "Fall back!" one of them snarled, but the humans didn't let up. They fired vial after vial of agent strain, turning the Kelleran's greatest advantage into a deadly vulnerability. That night, for the first time since the invasion began, the Kelleran suffered a crushing defeat. It was only one squad, one battle in a long, bloody war. But it was a victory, and it sent a message across the galaxy. The humans were adapting, evolving, and they weren't going down without a fight. As the days turned into weeks, the Kelleran's hold on Earth began to weaken. The introduction of Agent Strain had turned the tide, shifting the balance of power in humanity's favor. Reports flooded in from resistance cells all over the world. Kelleran patrols were being decimated, their armor shattered by the virulent compound that humans had engineered in mere days. But it wasn't just Agent Strain that was changing the face of the war. Humanity itself was evolving at a pace that defied all logic and expectation. In an underground bunker outside of what was once New York City, Dr. Elena Petrova stood over a makeshift operating table, her expression intense. A young soldier lay strapped down, his body convulsing as a strange silver liquid coursed through his veins. "How's his vitals?" she asked sharply. "Stable, but barely," replied Marco, his eyes glued to the monitor. "Heart rate's spiking. Brain activity is off the charts." Petrova nodded grimly. "It's working then." The procedure they were performing was risky, experimental, borderline insane. Using reverse-engineered Kelleran biotech and a synthetic variant of Agent Strain, they were attempting to push the human body to its limits. The goal? To create a new breed of soldier, one who could match the Kelleran warriors in strength, speed, and resilience. The young man on the table, Corporal Jason Harker, had volunteered for the procedure knowing full well that it could kill him. But like every other human who had survived the past few weeks of hell, he was desperate for a way to fight back. Suddenly, Harker's eyes snapped open. They glowed with an eerie metallic light, and his body jerked against the restraints with such force that the steel buckles groaned. "Doc!" Marco yelled. "He's—" Harker let out a guttural roar and ripped free of the restraints. He moved with blinding speed, faster than any human should have been able to. The researchers scrambled back, but Petrova held her ground, meeting Harker's gaze with calm intensity. "Jason," she said firmly, "focus. Breathe." The young man trembled, his muscles bunching and flexing unnaturally. But then, slowly, the tension drained from his body. He blinked, his eyes returning to their normal, human blue. I'm okay," he whispered hoarsely, looking down at his own hands in amazement. "I feel incredible." Petrova allowed herself a small smile. "Good. Because we need you out there, Corporal. The Kelleran think they're the apex predators. Let's show them what human evolution really looks like." Within days, Harker wasn't alone. More volunteers came forward, and the enhancement spread through the ranks of the resistance. These enhanced warriors, as they were quickly dubbed, became the spearhead of humanity's counterattack. Armed with Agent Strain and their own newly enhanced abilities, they struck fear into the hearts of the Kelleran invaders. But it wasn't just physical power that set the enhanced apart. Humanity's greatest strength had always been its capacity to adapt, to innovate. And now, that adaptability was being pushed to the extreme. The enhanced began to develop new tactics and strategies on the fly, coordinating through a kind of instinctual pack mentality that left the Kelleran baffled. In the dense jungles of the Amazon, an enhanced squad led by Harker took down an entire Kelleran outpost in a matter of minutes. They moved like ghosts, striking from all directions, overwhelming the Kelleran warriors with sheer speed and precision. What are they? One of the surviving Kelleran soldiers rasped, his eyes wide with fear as Harker loomed over him. Harker grinned, baring his teeth in a feral smile. We're human, he said simply. And we're just getting started. The Kelleran had never encountered anything like it. On every world they had conquered, they had crushed resistance with sheer brute force. But the humans were different. They didn't just resist, they learned. They evolved. And for the first time, the Kelleran began to wonder if they had made a terrible mistake. High Commander Alarak watched the latest battlefield reports in stunned disbelief. Images of Kelleran warriors being torn apart by packs of enhanced humans filled the holoscreens, each one a testament to the brutal efficiency of these new, apex predators. What is happening down there? He snarled, his claws clenching into fists. The tactical officer, a grizzled veteran named Rethvar, shook his head slowly. High Commander, it appears the humans are changing. Their combat capabilities are improving at a rate that shouldn't be possible. Impossible, Alarak spat. They're a primitive species. How could they? I don't know, Rethvar snapped, frustration and fear etched on his face. But it's happening. They're adapting to us. Every time we counter their strategies, they come up with something new. It's like they're evolving in real time. Alarak's gaze hardened. Then we need to escalate. Prepare the bombardment fleets. If we can't break their defenses on the ground, we'll turn their entire planet to ash. Rethvar hesitated. But sir, the consequences… Do it! Alarak roared. I will not be humiliated by a race of hairless primates. Back on Earth, the bombardment began. Massive Kelleran warships descended from the skies, unleashing hellfire upon cities, forests, and strongholds alike. Entire regions were reduced to smoldering craters, and millions more died in the flames. But humanity didn't break. In fact, the bombardment only seemed to strengthen their resolve. As the world burned, resistance cells went dark, only to reappear days later, launching devastating counterattacks against Kelleran supply lines and command centers. In the ashes of Paris, a lone resistance fighter, covered in soot and blood, stared up at a Kelleran ship hovering overhead. He raised a battered makeshift rocket launcher and fired, his defiant scream echoing through the ruins. Come on, you bastards, he roared. We're still here. The rocket struck true, the explosion rocking the massive warship. It wasn't enough to bring it down, but the act of defiance spread like wildfire. Across the world, humans fought back with everything they had, refusing to be cowed by the Kelleran's superior firepower. The Enhanced led the charge, their numbers growing as more and more humans underwent the procedure. But even those who weren't enhanced found ways to fight back. Old men and women picked up rifles, children sabotaged supply convoys, and entire towns became strongholds of resistance. For every human the Kelleran killed, 2 more rose to take their place. High above Earth, in the command chamber of his flagship, Alarak watched in silence as his fleets laid waste to the human cities. But as the reports continued to flood in, a chill crept into his heart. The bombardment was supposed to crush human morale. It was supposed to break their will. But instead, the humans seemed to be growing stronger, their defiance more intense with each passing day. What are we dealing with? Alarak muttered, his gaze distant. The humans were supposed to be weak. They were supposed to fall like all the others. But they hadn't. And for the first time in his long, brutal career, Alarak began to wonder if the Kelleran had underestimated not just humanity's strength, but its will to survive. If they couldn't break that will, then perhaps, just perhaps, there was no force in the galaxy that could stop them. The Kelleran offensive was relentless. Entire swathes of the Earth's surface had been scorched, reduced to blackened wastelands under the assault of orbital bombardments. And yet, despite all the destruction, humanity continued to adapt. The Enhanced were just one piece of the evolving puzzle. Deep within the shattered remnants of the once thriving Tokyo, a small band of human fighters moved silently through the ruined streets. They were a mix of enhanced soldiers and what the resistance now called shadows, individuals who had not undergone the full procedure, but had been treated with a lesser strain of agent strain, granting them enhanced cognitive abilities and heightened sensory perception. These shadows acted as the eyes and ears of the resistance, able to anticipate enemy movements and counter them with a precision that bordered on supernatural. "Target approaching," whispered a young woman named Lila, her eyes glowing faintly as she stared into the darkness. Her fingers traced the air, marking out patterns only she could see. 4. Kelleran. Warriors. Standard patrol formation. They'll be here in 20 seconds. The squad leader, an enhanced named Rourke, nodded. His massive form shifted slightly as he settled into position, his breathing steady and controlled. "Positions, everyone. Quiet and clean." They didn't have to wait long. The Kelleran warriors appeared just as Lila had predicted, their armored forms moving through the rubble with a lethal grace. These soldiers were heavily armed and armored, towering over the humans by at least 2 feet. But size and strength weren't enough. Not anymore. Rourke moved first. One moment he was crouched behind a twisted beam of steel. The next, he was a blur of motion, closing the distance between himself and the nearest Kelleran in a heartbeat. His hand shot out, fingers splayed, and struck a precise point at the base of the alien's neck. The Kelleran convulsed, its body locking up as nerve clusters short-circuited. The other 3 aliens spun around, weapons raised, but the shadows were already in motion. Lila darted forward, her movements impossibly fluid, slipping between the warriors as if she were made of smoke. Before they could react, she placed small magnetic devices on the joints of their armor. She leaped back, eyes alight with satisfaction. "Lights out," she murmured. With a sharp crack, the devices activated, sending high-voltage pulses through the alien's systems. The Kelleran collapsed, their bodies twitching as their neural interfaces overloaded. Rourke straightened, surveying the scene with a faint smile. "Nice work." Lila grinned. "They're getting slower. We're starting to figure them out." It was true. Every battle, every skirmish brought new data, new insights. And humanity, unlike the rigidly hierarchical Kelleran, was using that information to change the way they fought. The resistance was no longer just a disorganized group of desperate survivors. They were becoming something far more dangerous. An army of hunters, stalking their alien prey with a precision and savagery that made even the Kelleran shudder. Across the globe, similar stories were playing out. Human forces, bolstered by enhanced and shadows alike, began to take the fight to the Kelleran. They struck at weak points in the alien lines, sabotaging supply depots, cutting off reinforcements, and turning the Kelleran's own technology against them. It wasn't just military might that was turning the tide. It was strategy. It was coordination. It was a human ability that the Kelleran had completely overlooked. The power of unity in the face of annihilation. In the war room of the Central Resistance Base, deep beneath the Rocky Mountains, General Carver stood before a massive digital display, watching the tactical overlays shift and pulse. Lines of red and blue crisscrossed the map of Earth, each one representing a battle, a skirmish, or a strategic maneuver. What had once been a sea of red, Kelleran dominance, was now a shifting patchwork of blue, as humanity clawed back territory piece by piece. "They're not used to this kind of warfare," Carver murmured, his gaze intense. "The Kelleran fight with brute force. They dominate, but we're using finesse. We're hitting them where it hurts." Beside him, Dr. Petrova nodded. "They've always been able to crush their enemies through superior numbers and firepower. But now, they're being forced into a war of attrition, and they're losing." Carver's lips thinned into a grim smile. "That's because they've never faced a species that learns as quickly as we do." But the Kelleran weren't ready to admit defeat. In a last-ditch effort to regain control, High Commander Alarak ordered the deployment of their most powerful weapon, the obliterator beams. These massive orbital cannons had the power to vaporize entire cities in a single shot. If humanity wouldn't submit, then the Kelleran would reduce their world to ashes. The first blast struck Washington, D.C., turning the once great capital into a smoldering crater. The second annihilated Beijing, wiping out millions in a heartbeat. Panic rippled through the resistance. For all their advancements, for all their evolution, they still couldn't counter a weapon of such raw, destructive power. Morale plummeted. Despair threatened to undo everything they had fought for. But then, in the midst of the chaos, a new message crackled through the resistance channels. It was a transmission from the crew of the Athena. one of the few human ships that had survived the initial Kelleran invasion. Resistance Command. This is Captain Ramirez. We've analyzed the Kelleran's orbital bombardment pattern, and we've found a weakness. A hushed silence fell over the war room. Carver leaned forward, his knuckles white. Go on, Captain. Ramirez's voice was tense but steady. The obliterator beams are powerful, but they require an enormous amount of energy to fire. We believe the Kelleran are using a network of massive power stations hidden deep within the Earth's crust to fuel the blasts. Petrova's eyes widened. You mean, if we take out those stations? We can neutralize their beams, Ramirez confirmed. But we'll need to hit all three simultaneously. If even one station remains active, the beams will keep firing. A murmur of disbelief and hope swept through the room. Carver's gaze hardened, a fierce determination blazing in his eyes. Then we'll hit them, he said quietly. We'll hit them hard. The plan was as audacious as it was dangerous. 3 strike teams, composed of the best enhanced and shadows humanity had to offer, would infiltrate the Kelleran power stations and disable them. The stations were heavily guarded, buried deep underground, and protected by Kelleran elites. But if the strike team succeeded, it would be the beginning of the end for the Kelleran occupation. As the strike teams prepared for their missions, a sense of finality hung in the air. This was their last chance. If they failed, humanity's resistance would be broken. But if they succeeded, the entire world held its breath. And then, in the darkness of the underground bunkers, in the shattered ruins of once great cities, and in the hearts of every human still standing, a single thought echoed. We will not go quietly. The strike teams moved out, their mission clear. Disable the power stations, neutralize the obliterator beams, and show the Kelleran what happens when humans refuse to kneel. The 3 strike teams, each comprised of humanity's finest enhanced warriors and shadows, moved out under the cover of darkness. They were codenamed *Alpha*, *Bravo*, and *Delta*. Their target, the Kelleran power stations, buried deep within the Earth's crust. These facilities, hidden in remote locations, were the lifeblood of the obliterator beams. If the humans could sever that lifeline, the aliens' greatest weapon would be rendered useless. Alpha Team, led by Rourke, approached the station in the Andes Mountains. The facility was a fortress of steel and energy conduits, crawling with Kelleran guards. But Rourke's squad moved like shadows, slipping past patrols and automated defenses with a lethal grace that was distinctly human. Stay low. Stay quiet, Rourke whispered into his mic, his voice calm but commanding. We only have one shot at this. Meanwhile, Bravo Team made their way through the icy tundras of Siberia, where the second power station lay buried beneath layers of reinforced rock and ice. Their leader, Lila, signaled for silence as they navigated through a maze of tunnels. The temperature was bone-chilling, but the shadows barely felt it, their focus honed to a razor's edge. Power readings are off the charts, one of the techs whispered. We'll have to overload the core manually. Delta Team, led by Captain Ramirez himself, was already deep underground beneath the deserts of the American Southwest. This station was the most heavily guarded, the Kelleran having anticipated human interference. But that didn't stop the team. Every member knew the stakes. If they failed, humanity would be crushed under the Kelleran's iron heel. Keep it tight, Ramirez murmured as they descended into the heart of the facility, and watch each other's backs. The countdown began. Each team moved with clockwork precision, infiltrating the stations in tandem. They avoided security drones and disabled biosignature scanners. Every step was calculated, every movement executed with a lethal efficiency. These were humans at the peak of their evolution, outthinking and outmaneuvering an ancient alien empire that had ruled the stars for millennia. Rourke's team reached the central core of the Andes facility, a massive humming sphere of pulsating energy. It was encased in layers of Kelleran technology, shielded by fields that shimmered with a faint blue light. Rourke glanced at his explosives expert, a young man named Davis, who nodded confidently. 10 seconds, Davis whispered, his fingers dancing over the detonation controls. Just 10 seconds to turn this thing into scrap. Lila's team in Siberia found themselves facing a different challenge. The core was protected by an elite squad of Kelleran warriors, their forms cloaked in shimmering armor. But Lila was ready. She signaled to her team, and they struck like lightning, fast, silent, deadly. Within moments, the Kelleran guards lay on the ground, their bodies lifeless. "Core exposed," Lila reported, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. Beginning the overload sequence. Down in the American Southwest, Ramirez's team faced overwhelming odds. The Kelleran had fortified the entire facility, and their resistance was fierce. Plasma bolts lit up the darkness, the air crackling with energy. But Ramirez and his men pushed forward, driven by a single, unrelenting determination. "Ramirez, we can't hold them!" one of his soldiers shouted, ducking behind cover as a barrage of plasma fire scorched the walls. "We don't need to hold them," Ramirez replied grimly. "Just get me to that core." With a final burst of gunfire, Delta Team breached the central chamber of their power station. The core loomed before them, a throbbing, malevolent sphere of energy. Ramirez didn't hesitate. He sprinted forward, slamming a series of charges onto the base of the core. His heart pounded as he activated the detonator. "All teams, this is Delta. Cores are rigged. Prepare for synchronized detonation on my mark." "Alpha, ready," Rourke's calm voice crackled over the comm. "Bravo, ready," Lila echoed. Ramirez took a deep breath, his gaze locked on the swirling energy of the core. This was it, the moment everything came down to. 3, 2, 1. Mark! A series of explosions ripped through the depths of the earth. Each core detonated simultaneously, sending shockwaves of energy through the entire Kelleran power grid. The facilities crumbled, their massive generators disintegrating in a blaze of light and fire. The energy surge traveled up the conduits, tearing through the network of power lines that connected the stations to the obliterator beams in orbit. And then, silence. The Kelleran fleet, hovering ominously above Earth, suddenly went dark. The obliterator beams, once poised to unleash another wave of destruction, powered down, their energy reserves drained. The mighty warships, the instruments of humanity's annihilation, were now little more than floating hulks. Cheers erupted across the resistance channels. Humanity had done the impossible. They had crippled the Kelleran's greatest weapon. But Ramirez's voice cut through the jubilation, calm and resolute. "We're not done yet." With the obliterator beams neutralized, the human fleet launched a counteroffensive. It wasn't much. Dozens of ships cobbled together from the remnants of Earth's military, supported by enhanced ground forces. But it was enough. Human pilots, driven by a fury and determination that the Kelleran had never anticipated, tore into the alien fleet with a savagery that bordered on suicidal. The Kelleran forces, caught off guard and deprived of their greatest weapon, began to falter. For the first time in millennia, the ancient empire found itself on the defensive. On the ground, enhanced soldiers led the charge, storming Kelleran command centers and reclaiming human cities one by one. Rourke's squad tore through the Andes facility, cutting down Kelleran officers and planting human flags in the shattered remnants of alien strongholds. Lila's team liberated the Siberian power station, turning the tables on the Kelleran garrisons that had held their land. And in the American Southwest, Ramirez himself stood atop the smoldering ruins of the main power station, the tattered flag of Earth's resistance billowing behind him. "Broadcast this," he ordered, gesturing to the communication officer. The message went out across every human channel, a simple statement that sent a shiver down the spine of every Kelleran soldier. "This is Captain Ramirez. The Earth is ours, and we're coming for you." The Kelleran Empire, once the unchallenged ruler of 1,000 worlds, crumbled within weeks. Human forces, now bolstered by their victory, launched a relentless campaign against the alien invaders. City by city, world by world, they pushed the Kelleran back, their ferocity unmatched. But it wasn't just brute force that won the war. It was intelligence, adaptability. Humanity had learned, evolved, and now they were using every piece of knowledge, every trick and tactic they had acquired, to dismantle the Kelleran from the inside out. High Commander Alarak, the once proud leader of the Kelleran, was brought to his knees before a human tribunal. His eyes, once filled with arrogance, now held only fear and disbelief. "How?" he whispered, his voice a broken rasp. "How did you do this?" Ramirez, standing before him, gave a grim smile. "Humans evolve," he said quietly. "We adapt. You thought you could crush us, but all you did was make us stronger." And with that, the age of the Kelleran ended. The galaxy, once dominated by an ancient alien empire, now belonged to a new species: humans, the ultimate survivors, the apex predators of the stars.